But without further ado, I'm going to pass straight across to Mark Burnett, and I think we are sharing Mark's slides. Yep, we are. Fantastic. And Mark is going to talk to us about some of the developments, some of the updates that are being made to the European standard and guidelines with regards to the reporting of minerals. So Mark, I'll invite you to introduce yourself and take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And luckily, we have the expert on the panel who can answer a lot of the questions that may come up as to how this all developed. So, ladies and gentlemen, PERC is the Pan-European Reporting Code. So it has been raised several times what regulates publicly listed companies. In Europe, this is the Pan-European Reporting Code. It's part of the, next slide, please, Rose. Part of what is referred to as the CRIRSCO group of codes. Now, in the past, everybody is worried about financial shenanigans going on. So most mining people are very familiar with things like the Poseidon nickel saga, BRIX, and various other financial mining implications or things that have went wrong in the financial side. But what has been, and this then led to what was referred to as the Denver Accords, which then developed into the CRIRSCO reporting standards. And as you can see, large parts of the world are covered by some sort of regulatory framework. And the basis of these codes basically resides in effectively 3 to 4 principles. That the information that is discussed is material, it's transparent, that the people reporting that information are competent in what they're doing, and that at least in PERC, there's a degree of accountability in terms of the professionals and organizations involved with this. Next slide, please, Rose. Now, in terms of the responsibility and the people signed up to PERC, as you can see there, there's six professional organizations, all which have a standard and reporting code. So there is a code of ethics which the professionals involved with them are required to report to. There is enforceable disciplinary procedures that can be invoked on members who do not do the job accurately and ethically. And we need to keep ourselves up to date in terms of what is going on. Next slide, please, Rose. Now, the way that we report things, and the way that has been reported, is referred to as Table 1, where you can see as we move from geological confidence, we classify our rocks in terms of inferred, indicated, and measured. To get to something we can mine economically or extract to make money, which has always been the focus of at least a Western capitalist-driven society where you have to make money in terms of what you're doing, we would then, or the technical professionals would then apply what's referred to as the modifying factors, which you can see down at the bottom. Now, 90% of the time, these are focused on the hardcore technical aspects, mining, processing, metallurgy, and economics. There has been notification of discussing things like environmental and social, but those have all taken a relatively low-key role in comparison to the technical aspects. However, this all changed on the 23rd of May 2020 when a very large international mining company decided that in the mine expansion that some caves were getting in the way and they were removed. I don't think anyone really anticipated the backlash that would come from civil society in terms of this happening. It was out in the bush, no one really cared about it, or no one thought anyone would care about it until the social aspects were raised. And if you've been following the press, you'll see that the shareholders of the specific company 7 days ago, 60% of the shareholders voted against remuneration packages for the executives of the company. The vote was taken under advisement, which means the company didn't actually have to take this into account. But it's showing that shareholders are becoming increasingly concerned about non-technical aspects and how this is impacting, including in places which are remote. Next slide, please. And this is some work that was done by Smith & Williamson, just showing that there's a growing concern from investors, and this has been discussed several times by other presenters, so I won't belabor this point. But people are becoming more and more aware that it's not just all about making the money. There are lots of implications. It's no longer a case of, if we do mining and we do it in an emerging economy, that things can happen like they have done in the past. There's a growing concern that there's a growing concern that we need to take into account cultural heritage, and it's not just a case of, might is right, and the big mining company can go in and do whatever they want, however they want, and walk away with no implications and no consequences. Next slide, please. So how is this all taken into account? Now, the way that most technical reports have been written in the past, and which most people are familiar with, is like PERC, JORC, NI 43-101. They have certain requirements in terms of reporting the reserves. Now, a specific person or an individual is appointed to effectively coordinate and conduct the group of technical professionals that get involved in this. And generally the analogy used as being the lead competent person is like a conductor, and he or she needs to be aware or ensure that all the people in the team are competent in the areas of expertise. So the lead competent person, or in terms of the NI 43-101 reporting requirements, the qualified person has to be at least familiar with the minimum standards that the technical professionals need to adhere to within the specific areas of expertise. Next slide, please. Now, what has happened, and this gets back to ongoing professional development, is with the growing forces of ESG coming through and impacting on the financial aspects of reporting and reporting codes. What PERC did, or rather what CRIRSCO did, is then start investigating and expanding on the ESG requirements in our technical reporting codes. So what PERC was then mandated to do is to expand on this, where Sarah Gordon and Catherine McCullum basically led the team on the expansion of the PERC ESG requirements, which led to a greater expansion of what's referred to as Chapter 13 and the requirements, and then also in what's referred to as Table 1, a detailed checklist of the requirements that need to be included in any technical report that gets done. Now, I should have commented that these are for publicly listed companies only. There still obviously remains a concern that companies, and this is something that I've noticed, a lot of companies feel that some of these ESG requirements are becoming too onerous. So what is happening is they start delisting from the various stock exchanges and go private, where these type of transparency rules or requirements no longer apply. So getting back to PERC, so what PERC now includes in terms of the guidance of the information that should be included in the technical reports is that nice long list of things that you can see, which gives competent people like me some additional bedtime reading before we can make sure or ensure that the team players in our technical report are actually competent in terms of what they're doing. Next slide, please, Rose. However, just when you think that it can't get worse in terms of additional reading, when you start looking from a purely legal point of view, this is what a minimum list that Baker and McKenzie suggest should be considered when doing any reporting requirements, and the ESG things that should be included or at least considered in technical reports when you're looking at the modifying factors and in terms of, can we mine this area economically and make money out of it without upsetting too many people, or rather without actually doing things which will upset and bring the technical person into violation of the ethical standards and requirements. Next slide, please. So what PERC now does is, for any public reporting code, we've now moved away from just pure technical reporting documentation, such as quarterly reports, annual reports, competent persons reports, and we now include things such as environmental and sustainability statements must include the information required in terms of PERC. We also now need to include things like the potential environmental impact of the exploration. So a lot of cases, a resource would be quoted with very little consideration in terms of longer term ESG aspects. There would be on mine or company related environmental concerns and procedures and protocols to follow, but this generally didn't translate itself through into the documentation that was required, or even the thinking process that the geologists would apply to the work that they were doing. Next slide, please, Rose. So these are some of the things which are and will be noted in the new PERC code when it comes out later on this year, that we now need to include, or the competent person needs to understand or have demonstrable awarenesses of this, and what the critical standards and principles are. that are required in this. So again, it's not just a case of being focused on a single code or running through a tick box exercise to say, yes, we've included IFC rules, World Bank rules, and everything else. It's now getting to the stage that, next slide, please, Rose. It's now getting to the stage that we're moving away from purely following a legal code. We're now getting to the stage of geoethics, an aspect of, as at least speaking as a geologist, we can't just sit back and say we've done a technical tick box, we've ticked everything. We need to understand the bigger issues that will impact on societies as a whole in the areas that we operate in. Thank you very much. And I have completed that with, I think, on time.
Perfect. That is a beautiful. Thank you very, very much, Mark. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for a wonderful round of applause for Mark Burnett. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So Mark, you mentioned that, of course, PERC has been updated, which is great. What are the next steps? How can we get a hold of that update? And are the other codes, etc., around the world making use of it?
Well, I think Ruth may want to step in here as well. So Ruth, can I pass that one to you?
Ruth is finding that video button and that mute button. There she is.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date, Sarah, but we're just tidying up some comments we've had from our sort of slightly wider but still in the community consultation group. And then the standard, it's a standard, not a code, in fact, because it hasn't got mandatory force. It's not backed up by legislation as JORC, for example, is. So it's just a nuance, but it's a standard that's exactly the same in many ways as all the other CRIRSCO codes and standards. I think in the summer it'll be published as a consultation draft.
Cool, excellent. So consultation draft, which I guess then means that, because I'm aware that JORC, which is the Australian code, and 43101, which is the Canadian code, and then many of the other nations around the planet are also taking a look at how does ESG really manifest within their own codes. I guess they will then be able to get a proper look at it and ascertain if they want to pull anything across to their codes. Is that correct?
Well, they've already had a proper look at it, because they've had a look at it, because the whole of the CRIRSCO community has been consulted. And so we've got input from all of the other national reporting organisations, which is what we call the members of CRIRSCO. So yeah, that conversation is really alive and progressing within CRIRSCO, as you say, and each member of CRIRSCO, each NRO, is proceeding at its own pace and with its own constraints. And when we look at Australia and Canada, there are legal issues too, which may frustrate. We're a bit more nimble in PERC because we don't have those legal constraints. But it's another conversation about whether there should be stronger regulation in Europe of this kind of thing. But yeah, it's coming soon, and it will be completely available to anybody who wants to look at it.
Brilliant, thanks, Ruth. So one final question. And for those ladies and gentlemen on the line who are thinking, what are they talking about? PERC, CRIRSCO, JORC, I have no idea. Is this a different language? If you go to the little webpage that I've just posted, that contains a little bit of a glossary, or at least an interpretation of what these things actually mean. Basically, it's a world of geology stuff. Okay, and Maeve Boland has been fantastic and posted a question. So Mark, I don't know if you want to take this one. Maeve asks, the European Commission is enthusiastic about another acronym, UNFC, but thank you, Maeve, for telling us what that is. So that's United Nations Framework Classification of Resources. How does this fit with PERC? And do they use similar reporting or similar approaches with regards to the ESG reporting?
Okay, the simple answer is they do match. They have different audiences. So the UNFC code tends to be more for governments and parastatals that are looking at total, effectively, resource rent in a country. So all aspects. So if it's the minerals and materials that can lead to something. PERC, or rather the CRIRSCO codes, are designed for an investor market. So you've now got something that which you want to turn to economic account. So it's very easy to map PERC, or rather the CRIRSCO codes, back onto UNFC. Because UNFC tries to cover such a wide area of material, it's not always that easy to map UNFC requirements in reverse order. If you go to the another acronym, UNECE, I think it was the 13th conference that they hosted, all the presentations are available, and there's a number of case studies done by, I think, the British Geological Society Survey, I think the Finnish Geological Survey, and a number of others, where they take you through case studies in terms of how they've mapped information between the two different reporting codes. And earlier on, Professor Wall was also discussing how this is going to be done. So there's actually a lot of information out there. You're free to drop me an email. I'll go and, in fact, let me go and hunt down the website, and I'll go and post it as well in the chat box. It's probably the easiest way of solving the problem.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I know that Ruth is desperate to come in very, very quickly on UNFC.
Yeah, just to clarify that UNFC is a framework classification. It's a classification system. It has no codified reporting standards within it. So that's the distinction, that the CRIRSCO codes and standards are reporting standards for primarily the investment community for disclosures. There is exact congruence between the classification upon which the reporting standards are based and part of the United Nations framework classification for resources, but the UNFC is much bigger. It covers many other classes of raw materials and resources, and there's lots of cooperation and discussion between the two communities, between CRIRSCO and UNECE, and also very fruitful discussions about how to generate effective reporting standards associated with the wider UNFC, and incorporating this whole concept of competency and transparency, materiality, and so on. So yeah, and as Francis mentioned, this is absolutely crucial.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Ruth. And Mark, a final round of applause and massive thanks from all of us. So ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for the wonderful Mark.